Hey there, I'm Josh, and welcome back to The Lord of the Rings, Artifacts of Arda. In the last episode, we focused on the moment in the film where Gandalf courageously stopped the Balrog's advance on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and subsequently fell into the abyss below. Smitten by grief and shock, the remaining Fellowship hurries outside to escape the pursuing goblin horde. In their hasty retreat, the Fellowship finds themselves in Lothlórien, the realm of Celeborn and Galadriel. The pair of elven royalty welcomes the companions to rest and lick their wounds, with Galadriel taking the opportunity to completely scare the crap out of Frodo and the rest of us for a brief moment.
Thou shalt left me in despair!
Before reassuring him and supplying the Fellowship with the film's version of a video game loot drop. And here's where we'll be focusing today's video. Some of the gifts that Galadriel bestows on the companions are the Leaves of Lórien, small brooch pins to help secure their cloaks in the cold of the wilds. This is something I wanted to make for a long time, but I had no idea how. I knew that I wanted to make multiples of these brooches for either gifts or to sell, so I needed a way to do that. I found one method online using old pop cans or soda cans if you're a weirdo, and although this method looks nice, it's too flimsy and delicate for me. So I thought about carving each one out of wood. Then I remembered how long it took for me to carve out that Man of Steel symbol for my cousin. And even though I'm just turning 40, I'd rather get these things done before I retire. So, after tossing some ideas around with, and a suggestion from my friend Ben, I got a solution. Let's check it out. The method in which I'm going to make these leaf brooches first involves making a blank, or a template. To do that, I'm going to be using this modeling clay that I've used many times before. This stuff always works really well, so I have pretty good confidence in the results that I'll get. I pretty much just mashed out a little lump and then used the carving chisels to cut it into shape. Then I can just take my time molding it and adding all the details that I want. One really nice thing about using this clay is that if you make a mistake, it's pretty easy to fix it. You just either have to smooth it out or add some clay back into it to make it right. I rolled out some clay into a nice thin bead to add around the border of the leaf. Then I rolled out some even thinner beads to add as the veins. Once I was happy with that, I moved on to using a small wire brush to add a little bit of texture. With that, our prototype was done, so I just left it out on the workbench to dry for several days. For the next step, I first dusted on some baby powder to make for an easier release from the casting material. You see, I'm going to be casting these leaf brooches out of aluminum, which is something I've never done before. So this was an educational experience for me. You first have to make a form box or flask. Then you slowly add some of this casting sand, compacting it as you go. This is a slow process until you actually get the hang of it, and even then it's still pretty slow. But you want to make sure that there's no soft spots in any of this sand, because that'll just make for a bad casting. But once you flip it over, you just carefully remove the blank, and it leaves all the perfect detail in the cast. Next, I fired up my homemade foundry to melt some pop cans. This again was a trial and error type of situation. I first started out using charcoal briquettes, which after 2 hours was still not hot enough to even melt anything. So I switched over to lump charcoal, and within 10 minutes, it was hot enough to melt all the cans. This whole process is a lot more involved than what I'm showing here, so I'm going to make a separate video where I show all that detail. But for now, I dumped all the molten aluminum out of the crucible into the cast. I did this very slowly and carefully, and then threw caution to the wind and used a scrap piece of plywood to apply some pressure. I have since switched to using a brick, but the idea here was to push the molten metal into the cast to ensure that it got all the detail. So then I used my wife's favorite cooking tongs and flipped it over. Looks pretty good. A little burnt, but pretty good. I'm guessing there's a way to avoid burning the casting sand, but I haven't figured that out yet. Regardless, the cast picked up a lot of detail from the blank. Next, I took the piece over to the bandsaw to begin cutting it out. That's one nice thing about using aluminum. It's soft enough that you can use regular woodworking tools. You just have to be careful to take it slow so you don't get any bits of metal to be melted or stuck to the blade. With the leaf now cut to shape, I installed the fence on the bandsaw to cut down the thickness. And I used a couple of push sticks because I didn't want to burn my fingers or, cut them off. To rip down the thickness, I once again took my time, being careful to push it very slowly through the blade. I didn't film it, but I did run the bottom of the leaf on the belt sander to smooth it out a bit. And I was sure to wear a respirator for both it and this part here, because I don't know the dangers of inhaling any powdered aluminums, but I don't want to take that chance. Regardless, what I'm doing here is using the little wire brush attachment on the rotary carver to remove any surface impurities. Next, I had to drill some holes in the leaf to add a bit of wire. And to do that, I'm using my little spring-loaded center punch to first mark the holes. This makes drilling a lot easier so I don't end up drifting off the mark. Speaking of drilling, I clamped the leaf into the vise to make sure it didn't slide around, and then I used a 3/32 bit to very slowly and carefully drill the holes. Now for clarity's sake, I did experiment using some different sizes of wire. Specifically, I'm using this size of bit because I'm using a 2mm diameter wire for this particular leaf. And for some leaves, I used wire that was smaller than that. With the holes all drilled, it was time to move on to painting. For these leaves, I wanted the green to have a custom color, so I mixed up my own concoction of different paints and pigment powders. Then I very carefully brushed on multiple coats until I got the desired look I was wanting. You'll notice that besides the border, I'm painting the entire surface of the leaf. That's because I'll be going back over all the veins in just a bit, and there's a reason for that, which I'll explain. But first, let's cut some wire to insert in all those holes that I drew. This is 2mm aluminum craft wire, and I'm going to be securing it using a 2-part epoxy. If you've never seen it before, a 2-part epoxy consists of a resin and a hardener. You mix up equal parts, and within 5 minutes, you have a permanent bond. So for these wires, I very carefully applied some epoxy to the end of the wire and the inside of the hole, and then inserted the wire. First, I inserted the wire into 3 points on the leaf, and then after allowing ample time to dry, I bent the wire into shape and inserted the other end into the appropriate spots. Despite only needing to bend into a simple shape, the 2 short side wires were by far the hardest part of this process, probably because of the short distance and the tight clearance. Regardless, once I got those 2 pieces bent and secured into place, I moved on to the more intricate bending of the longer wire. This needed to be bent around the body and curled up around the top before being secured. Next, I moved on to finishing the surface of the leaf. To do this, I first applied 1 coat of the frosted pearl top coat, and then applied a matte clear finish on top of that. This allows it to have an iridescent appearance without being too glossy. With that done, it was time to move on to painting the veins of the leaf. I used a super fine tip paintbrush to apply a metallic silver paint. Through trial and error, I found that this was the best method to get the most brilliant shine on the veins. I had previously tried a couple different methods to do the veins. First, I simply tried to scratch away the paint to reveal the aluminum beneath, but this looks splotchy and uneven. So next, I painted the veins before applying the clear coat, and that resulted in the veins looking more muted and dull. So finally, I landed on the method you're seeing here, and trust me, it looks the best. The final step is to turn these leaves into brooches, and to do that, I'm using these brooch pins, which I'm attaching using the same epoxy that I used before. Now, let's take a look at it all done. Considering that this is my first attempt at ever casting anything, I'm pretty happy with the results I got. I'm really glad that the casting was able to capture a lot of detail from the blank, and I like how all the paint and wiring turned out as well. Even the brooch pin actually worked out pretty well. All in all, I would say that this project was a success, and I'm glad that I have a way of replicating it to make more for the future, though for now, I guess these will have to do. I'm very pleased with how these leaf brooches turned out. I think they look nice, they're solid, and I got to learn something pretty cool in the process of making them. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to make multiple leaves is because of something I mentioned like 2.5 months ago. In honor of these 5 years, and as a token of my appreciation, I'm going to be doing a little giveaway over the next couple of weeks, so be on the lookout for that. It's long overdue, but I'm going to give away one of these leaves to one lucky viewer. So if you're interested, all you need to do is leave a comment below this video saying who is your favorite character from The Lord of the Rings. Then, a week after this video airs, I'll post a follow-up video where I'll draw one name from the names of those who comment the name of their favorite character. And that name, who's named their favorite character's name, will be the winner. So, comment below and be on the lookout for that. Well, that does it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.